Most folks who came through my gate wanted something. A meal, a night in the barn, a horse shod, a debt forgiven, a lie told kindly. I'd learned to read them coming up the road, the way you read whether off a far ridge, who'd be gone by morning, who'd be trouble, who'd already given up and just hadn't fallen down yet. But I had no read on the 3 children standing at my fence the morning this story starts. None at all. The oldest couldn't have been 12. She held a folded square of paper against her chest like it was the only warm thing left in the world, and when she looked at me, she didn't ask for food. She didn't ask for shelter. She asked me a question, and that question would unmake every quiet, careful year I'd built since I buried the last person I loved. They'd been walking for 2 years, 2 winters, following a name across half a territory, town to town, on the strength of a hope so thin you could have read a newspaper through it. And I'm an old man who swore he was done caring about anybody. So before you decide how this ends, before you tell yourself you already know, stay with me. Because I thought I knew too. I was wrong about nearly all of it. The only thing I had right was that those children were going to break my heart. I just didn't know yet whether they'd put it back together after. The first thing I noticed was the dog wasn't barking. That's the kind of detail a man learns to mind out here, where the nearest neighbor is a half-day's ride, and the law is a notion more than a presence. Ruby barked at coyotes, at hawks, at the wind when it came off the north slope wrong. She barked at strangers from a quarter-mile out, low and serious, the way a good dog tells you something needs your attention before your eyes catch up. That morning she didn't bark. She stood at the corner of the barn with her ears up and her tail going slow, uncertain, and she looked back at me where I stood on the porch with my coffee, as if to ask what I wanted done about it. I followed her stare down to the fence line. There were 3 of them. Small, all of them, the way children are small when they haven't been fed right in a long while, not just short but narrow, whittled down. They stood in a row at the gate where the road came in, and they were not moving, and they were not speaking, and the cold morning fog was still hanging in the low places so that they looked half-finished, like something the land hadn't decided whether to keep. I want to tell you I felt something tender right off. I didn't. The first thing I felt, God forgive me, was tired. The kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. I was 56 years old that spring. I had 200 head to worry over and a back that argued with me every time I climbed into the saddle, and I had spent 8 years getting very good at wanting nothing and owing nobody. 3 children at my gate was a problem, and I had a low tolerance for problems that came wearing faces. Go on, I said to Ruby, but I didn't mean it, and she knew I didn't, and neither of us moved. I set my coffee on the rail and walked down. Up close they were worse than the fog had let on. The oldest was a girl, and she'd planted herself a half step ahead of the other 2 the way you'll see the lead horse stand between the herd and whatever's coming. She had dark hair cut crooked, cut by her own hand, I'd guess, with a knife, no mirror, and a man's coat far too big swallowing her down to the shins, and underneath all of it a face that had stopped being a child's face some while back. Not grown, just used. There's a difference, and I knew it on sight. The middle one was a boy, maybe 9, with a cowlick that stuck straight up like he'd been struck by lightning and survived it out of spite. He had his hand wrapped tight in the girl's coat hem and was trying very hard to look like he wasn't. And the small one was the one that got me, though I'd have died before I let it show. She was 4, maybe 5. She was asleep on her feet, more or less, leaning into the girl's hip with her thumb half in her mouth, and her cheek flushed a color cheeks aren't supposed to be, that dull hot red that means a fever's setting in deep. Her little chest worked too fast. Even from 6 feet off I could hear the rattle of her breathing, that wet click at the bottom of it. I'd heard that sound before. I'd heard it come out of someone I loved, and I'd heard it stop. Morning, I said, because I didn't have anything better. The girl looked at me. She had gray eyes, the cold flat gray of river ice, and they went over me top to bottom, my boots, my hands, the gun I wasn't wearing, my face, and I understood I was being assessed by somebody who'd been wrong about a man before and paid for it. It is a strange and terrible thing to be measured that way by a child, like being weighed by a soldier. "Are you the one who owns this land?" she said, not really a question. Her voice was hoarse, scraped thin. "Such as it is," I said. "Caleb Renner, this is the Renner spread, what there is left of it." I crouched down, slow, the way you do with a skittish horse, putting my eyes level with hers and below. "You've come a ways." "We don't want anything," she said quick, before I'd even finished. "We can work. I can work and Asa can carry, he's stronger than he looks. We don't want charity, we can pay our way." And there it was, the thing that finished me, though I fought it another full day before I admitted it. Not the fever, not the cold. It was the pride. That child standing there in a dead man's coat, 3 days from anything you could call a meal, holding a sick baby against her hip, and the first thing out of her mouth was that she didn't want charity. She'd offer me labor before she'd offer me her need. Somebody had raised her right, and then the world had tried to beat it out of her and not quite managed. "That little one's sick," I said. The gray eyes flickered, just once. "She'll be fine, she just needs. She needs to be warm, and she needs to be flat, and she needs a doctor, and she needs all three this morning, not this afternoon," I said. I stood back up, my knees made their usual complaint. "There's a fire in the house. There's broth on it because I'm an old fool who makes more than one man can eat. You're going to bring her inside, and I'll send Asa here for the doctor when the doctor's worth sending for, and you can decide later whether that makes you beholden to me. Right now I don't care. Come on." The girl didn't move. I watched the war happen on her face, the suspicion fighting the simple animal fact of a warm fire 40 feet away. She glanced down at the small one. The small one coughed, that whole tiny body folding around the cough, and the rattle was worse coming out of it. The boy, Asa, looked up at his sister. "Nell," he said, just her name, just that, and there was a whole argument in it. "Please. She's sick, please." The girl, Nell, closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, she decided. "If you touch us," she said to me, calm as still water, "I'll cut you. I have a knife and I know where to put it. I'm telling you so it's fair." "I believe you," I said, and I did. "Nobody's touching anybody. Doors open. Mind the loose board on the second step." I learned their names that first hour, and not much else. Nell, Asa. And the small one, the fevered one, was June, Junie, they called her, the both of them, soft, the way you'd handle something cracked. I got Junie laid out on the cot by the stove under every blanket I owned, and I got a little broth into her in spoonfuls, and I got her boots off her feet, and that nearly broke me right there because her socks had worn through and somebody, Nell, it had to be Nell, had bound the holes with strips torn off something, careful, the way you'd bandage a wound, so the child's bare skin wouldn't touch the ground. 2 years of walking, and the older sister had been giving the baby her socks. I didn't say anything about it. You don't, with people like that. You just file it away and you carry it for them so they don't have to know you saw. Nell wouldn't sit. She stood by the cot with her hand on Junie's hair, and she watched me move around my own kitchen like she expected me to turn into something. Asa, on the other hand, had located the bread, and I let him locate it. And when I cut him a slab and put butter on it and honey over the butter, the boy looked at it like he'd forgotten food could be a kindness instead of just a fuel. He ate it in 4 bites, and then he was ashamed of how fast he'd eaten it. And I made a point of cutting myself a slab too and eating it just as fast, so he'd have company in his hunger and wouldn't have to feel it alone. That's a trick I'd learned a long time ago, from a woman who knew more about feeding the hurting than I ever will. I didn't think about her on purpose. She just came in the door of my mind the way she does. Uninvited, and stood there. Margaret, my wife, 8 years gone that spring, and our boy 2 years before her, and the two of them between them had taken every reason I'd ever had to keep a fire in the house bigger than one man needs. I'd kept the fire anyway. I'd kept making too much broth. I told myself it was habit. It wasn't habit. It was a door I left open in case anybody ever came back through it. And nobody ever had. And here on this gray morning 3 strangers' children had walked through it instead. And I was furious about it, and I was grateful for it, and I couldn't have told you which was stronger. How long? I asked Nell low, while Asa was occupied with a second slab he didn't know I'd seen him take. She knew what I meant. 2 years, she said, a little more, since the snow before last. Walking. Mostly, we had a mule for a while. Something crossed her face and was gone. We don't anymore. And you're looking for somebody. She didn't answer that. Instead, she reached inside the big coat and I tensed, half expecting the knife she'd promised me. That's how she'd trained me already in 1 short hour, but it wasn't the knife. It was the folded square of paper she'd been holding at the fence. She held it a moment longer, the way you'd hold the last of something. Then she unfolded it, careful at the creases because the creases were near to giving out entire, and she turned it to face me. It was a likeness, drawn in pencil by somebody with a real hand for it, not a child's drawing, a true portrait, soft and exact. A man and a woman. The man broad-faced and bearded, laughing at whatever the artist had said to make him laugh. You could see it in the eyes. The woman beside him narrow and dark-haired and gray-eyed. Gray-eyed, river-ice gray, the same eyes that were watching me look. That's our mother, Nell said. Sarah, and that's our father, Thomas. We're looking for them. Have you seen them anywhere? Anyone who looks like them? And here is the part I have turned over in my hands 1,000 nights since. The part I'd give a great deal to have done different. Except I don't know what different would have been right. Because I had seen that man. Not in life. I want to be plain about that. I never shook Thomas's hand, never bought him a drink, never knew the sound of his laugh except as a thing a stranger had drawn from memory onto a square of paper a child had carried 2 years across a territory. But I had seen his face. There's a board outside the Territorial Land Office in Coldwater, 40 miles south of where I stood. A board where they nail up notices, claims abandoned, taxes owed, men wanted, men dead. And 18 months back, give or take, I'd stood in front of that board waiting on a clerk, and I'd read down it the way you do, idle, and there had been a notice. And the notice had a likeness on it. A printed likeness the way they do for the dead when nobody's come to claim them, and they want the name carried out into the country in case kin are looking. Broad face, beard, Thomas Hale deceased, fever, estate unclaimed, something close to that. I hadn't read it close because it hadn't been mine to read close. I'd waited on my clerk and I'd done my business and I'd ridden home and I had not thought about that board again in 18 months, not once, because why would I? It was a stranger's name on a stranger's death and the country is full of them. It wasn't a stranger anymore. It was this child's father, laughing in pencil, and his daughter was standing in my kitchen with river-ice eyes asking me if I'd seen him. And I had seen him dead on a board and ridden away whistling. And now I had to decide in the space of one breath what to do with that. I want you to understand the size of the thing I was holding. If I told her right then, cold in my kitchen, with the fever rattling in her baby sister's chest and 2 years of walking behind her and nothing in front of her but my answer, if I told her, yes, I think your father is dead, I think I saw his death nailed to a board in Coldwater, then I would be the man who ended it. The thing she'd carried. The reason she'd put one foot down and then the other across half a territory. The hope. I'd be the one who put it out in my kitchen, with my too much broth on the stove. And I didn't know. That's the thing. I didn't actually know. A printed likeness 18 months stale, half-read, a common enough face, a common enough name, Hale, Hall, who's to say I hadn't misremembered, hadn't laid this man's beard over some other dead man's face the way the mine does. To tell her would be to maybe end her hope on a maybe, and to not tell her would be to let her keep walking toward a grave. I have made hard calls in my life. I made a hard one when I decided where to bury my son so his mother could see the spot from the kitchen window, and a harder one a year later about whether to keep going on without the both of them. I thought I knew what hard was. I looked at that drawing a long moment. Long enough that Nell's face started to change, started to hope, God help me, because I was looking so long, because surely a man only looks that long when he recognizes somebody. Have you, she said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle of it, and all the river ice was gone, and she was 12 years old. Have you seen them? Sit down, I said. Have you seen them? Nell, I said it gentle as I knew how. Sit down. Your sister's sick and you're done in and you haven't told me, but I'd bet money none of you have eaten today. Sit down and eat and let me think on this likeness, because I want to give you a true answer and not a quick one. You've come too far for a quick one. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either, and we both half knew it, and she sat down because she had nothing left to stand on, and that was the first lie of kindness I told those children. It would not be the last. The doctor came up the road near noon. Not because I'd sent for him. I hadn't had the chance, hadn't had a body to spare. You don't send a half-starved 9-year-old 40 miles for a doctor. But because Doc Prout made his circuit through the high country once a month, and as God's own luck would have it, that was the day. I heard his buggy before I saw it and went out to flag him, and I have never in my life been so glad to see that sour old man. He looked at Junie a long time. He listened to her chest with his ear, and then with the little brass trumpet thing he carried, and he frowned, and he asked how long, and Nell said 3 days like this, worse the last 2, and he frowned deeper. Pneumonia setting in one lung, he said, finally quiet to me, out on the porch where the children couldn't hear. Maybe both before it's done. She's small and she's run down to nothing, and that's the part I don't like. A fed child fights this off. A starved one, he stopped. He'd been doctoring out here 30 years. He didn't need to finish. She needs warmth, broth, steam for the breathing, and she needs somebody awake by her tonight and likely the next 2 or 3. The fever'll break or it won't, and we'll know which inside of a few days. That's the honest size of it. You want it dressed up nicer, I can dress it, but you don't strike me as a man who wants it dressed. I don't, I said. He looked at me then, really looked, the way old men look at each other when they've both buried more than they've kept. These yours, Caleb? No. Whose then? And there it was again, the same fork in the same road. Whose? I could have told him about the board in Coldwater. Prout got around. He might have known something, confirmed it or knocked it down. But I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, not with Nell 40 feet off through a thin wall with her ear likely against it. Saying a thing out loud makes it real in a way that holding it doesn't. Mine for now, I said. We'll sort the rest later. Prout nodded slow, like that was an answer he'd heard before and respected. He left me a brown bottle and instructions, and he didn't charge me, which from Prout was the same as a man weeping. Send the boy down the mountain if she worsens past what that bottle can hold, he said, climbing back into his buggy. And Caleb, he paused, whatever the rest of it is, the sorting, however that goes. He looked at the house. Don't let that oldest one do it alone. She's been carrying the whole world up here. He tapped his own chest. Children carry it different than we do. It doesn't bend them. It just turns them old early, and then it breaks them all at once when they finally set it down. You watch for the setting down. That's the dangerous part. Then he was gone down the road, and I stood on my porch a while with the brown bottle in my hand, watching the place where the fog had finally burned off the low ground, thinking about a girl carrying the whole world and the moment she'd finally have to set it down, and dreading that I might be the one who'd have to make her. That night I sat up with Junie. Nell fought me on it, of course. She'd appointed herself the watcher of her sister 2 years back, and she was not inclined to hand the post to a stranger on the strength of one day. But the truth of her own body finally beat her. She'd not slept right in longer than she'd say, and somewhere past midnight she went down hard in the chair by the cot with her hand still tangled in Junie's hair, and I put a blanket over her and let her be. Asa was already asleep in my son's old bed in the back room, the first real bed under him in years, and I'd stood in that doorway a long moment watching a strange boy sleep where my own had slept, and I'll tell you, I don't have the words for what that did to me. Some doors, when they open, the wind that comes through carries everything. So it was just me and the small one, the long middle of the night, the stove ticking and the wind working at the eaves. I kept the steam going. I kept the broth warm and got what I could into her when she surfaced enough to swallow. I wiped her down when the fever spiked, and I piled the blankets back when it dropped her into the shakes, and somewhere in the deepest part of it, 3 or 4 in the morning, the hour when the sick slip away if they're going to, June opened her eyes and looked at me. They were brown, her eyes, not her mother's gray, her father's, I'd guess. The dead man's, maybe, I'll never know. She looked at me and she wasn't afraid, and that undid me more than fear would have. A child that's small, sick near to death, waking in a strange house to a strange weathered face, and not afraid. Like she'd run clean out of the strength it takes to be afraid. Like fear was one more thing her sister had been carrying for her. "Are you my papa?" she said, thick, slurred with fever, but I caught it. "I have started fires I shouldn't have started and put out fires I should have let burn. And I have lied to good men for bad reasons, and told the truth to bad men for worse ones. And in all my 56 years, I do not think I had ever been asked a question that cost me what that one did." "No, darlin'," I said, my voice didn't work right. "No, I'm just Caleb, I'm just the man whose fire you came to." "Oh," she said, and then drifting, already going back under, "Nell says we're close now, she says she can feel it, she says any day." And she closed her eyes and slept, and her breathing was a little easier than it had been. Just a little, the rattle gone shallow, and I sat there in the ticking dark holding a sick child's hand, and I let myself cry for the first time in a long while, quiet, so as not to wake the girl in the chair who'd carried the whole world. Any day, that's what Nell had told the baby. Any day now we'll find them. She'd been telling that child any day now for 2 years to keep her walking, the way you tell yourself a thing to get up the next hill, and now the next hill was my kitchen, and the only man on it knew the road they were on ended at a board in cold water with a dead man's face printed on it. I made up my mind that night, not all the way, but the first part of it. I wasn't going to tell her yet, not until I knew. A half-read notice 18 months stale was not enough to put out a hope 2 years in the burning. I owed her certainty before I owed her grief, so I'd find the certainty. I'd ride to Coldwater myself, soon as the baby was out of the woods, and I'd stand in front of that board, or find the man who kept its records, and I'd learn whether Thomas Hale was their Thomas, and whether he was truly dead, and whether, please God, there was any word at all of a gray-eyed woman named Sarah who might yet be somewhere drawing breath. And until I knew, I'd keep the fire too big, and the broth too much, and the door open. I'd let them rest. I'd let the girl set the world down for a few days without knowing she'd never have to pick it all back up the same way again. It was the kindest thing I knew how to do, and it was a kind of lie. And out here those two are kin more often than anybody likes to say. Junie's fever broke on the 3rd day, just before dawn. I felt it go, felt the change in her hand where I held it, the heat draining out of her into a clean, cool damp, the shaking gone, the breath coming slow and deep and easy at last. Prude had said we'd know inside a few days which way it would break, and we knew now, and it had broken our way. And I sat there feeling the life decide to stay in that little body, and I thought my heart would come apart with the relief of it. Nell woke to me gripping the cot rail. She was up and across the room before her eyes were all the way open, her hand going for Junie's forehead, and I watched her feel what I'd felt, the cool, the quiet, the breathing, and I watched 2 years come off her face all at once. She didn't cry. She was too far past crying for something this big. She'd cried over smaller things, I'd guess, and saved nothing for the large ones. She just put her forehead down against her little sister's and held it there, and her shoulders shook once, hard, and were still. "She's all right," she said, to no one, to herself, to God maybe. "She's all right." "She's all right," I agreed. And then Nell lifted her head and looked at me, and her face was open in a way it hadn't been once in 3 days, undefended, soft, young. And she said the thing that locked the chains on me for good and all, The thing that meant I was never going to be able to ride to Coldwater and come back and put out her hope and ride away again like a board nailed up by a stranger. You stayed up, she said. All 3 nights. I kept waking up and you were there. You didn't have to. We're nobody to you. You're somebody, I said. You're somebody to somebody anyhow, and that'll do. Why, she said, not suspicious now, just lost. Just a child who'd been given a thing and didn't have a place to set it. Why'd you do all this for us? I looked at her a long while. The gray eyes. Her mother's eyes, out of a drawing, out of 2 years of walking, out of a hope I was carrying the end of in my chest like a stone I hadn't decided when to set down. I could have told her then, the whole of it. The board, Coldwater, the maybe-dead man with her father's face. The dawn was the kind of quiet that asks for the truth. Instead I said, because somebody once kept a fire too big for me when I was about as low as a man gets, and I never got to pay it back to her. So I'm paying it forward to you. That's all. That's the whole why. Which was true. Every word of it was true. It just wasn't all of it. After Junie's strong enough to travel, I said, getting up, my knees telling me about the 3 nights, I'm going to ride down to Coldwater. There's records there. Land office, churches, the lot. If your folks came through this country to make a claim, there'll be a paper on it somewhere, and a paper's a thread, and a thread you can follow. You and the little ones'll stay here and rest up while I pull on it. We'll find out where they went. I promise you that much. I promise we'll find out where they went. Watch the words a careful man chooses when he's trying not to lie and can't quite tell the truth either. We'll find out where they went. Not we'll find them. Not they're alive. Where they went. A man can keep that promise even if where they went is into the ground. Nell didn't catch the careful words. She heard the promise, and she heard the part of her that had been alone with the whole world for 2 years finally hand a piece of it to a grown man who said he'd carry it. And her face when she heard that, the pure animal relief of being a child again for one morning, of not being the one who had to find the way. I had to turn and tend the stove so she wouldn't see my own face. Thank you, she said behind me, small. Thank you, Mr. Renner. Caleb, I said to the stove, just Caleb. Outside, the sun was finally clearing the east ridge, throwing long gold light across the yard where Ruby lay watching the road. And inside, for the first time in 8 years, my house was full of breathing, the babies easy now, the boys deep in my son's old bed, the girls slow and steady as the danger drained out of the morning. It should have been a good moment. It was a good moment. I'd keep it. But I stood there at my own stove with a dead man's face printed on the back of my eyes, and I knew that somewhere 40 miles south a board still hung outside a land office, and on it, or in the records behind it, was the truth I'd promised to go and find. And I understood, the way you understand whether coming off a far ridge before you can rightly see it, that the hardest morning of my life was still out there on the road, and that it was coming. And that when it came, I would be the one who had to open the door to it. I poured the girl a bowl of broth, too much like always. I didn't know yet that Coldwater would have an answer for me that I'd never once thought to fear, that the truth waiting on that board was stranger and crueler, and in the very end, kinder than the simple grave I was bracing for. I left for Coldwater on a Tuesday, 4 days after Junie's fever broke, before the sun was up and before the children were awake, though I should have known better than to think I'd slip past Nell. She was on the porch when I led the horse out, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, sitting on the top step with her knees pulled up, watching me the way Ruby watched the road. I don't know how long she'd been there, long enough to have decided not to stop me. She'd learned, I think, that stopping a thing rarely worked and watching it close worked better. You're going now, she said. I'm going now. Be back inside 3 days, 4 at the most. You remember everything I told you. She recited it back at me flat and exact, the way she did everything, where the rifle was and how it loaded, which neighbor to ride for if trouble came that the rifle couldn't fix, how much to feed the stock, and when, the brown bottle and its spoonfuls if Junie's chest went bad again. She'd memorized all of it the first time I said it. I'd never met a child who held instructions the way she did, like each one was a coin she couldn't afford to drop. "Good," I said. She nodded, then as I got my foot in the stirrup, "Mr. Renner." "Caleb." "Caleb." She tried it like it was a size of clothing she wasn't sure fit. "When you find the paper, the thread, the one you said you'd pull on." "Yeah." "Whatever it says." Her gray eyes were very steady and very young in the porch dark. "I want the true thing, not the soft thing. People keep—" She stopped, picked the words up again. "People keep giving us the soft thing. The lady in Halloran's Crossing who said our mother had surely gone on to the next town and we'd surely catch her. The preacher in Dell who said God surely had a plan. Everybody's so sure of the soft thing." Her jaw set. "I'm 12. I've buried a mule and I've buried things. I can carry the true thing, I just can't carry not knowing anymore. The not knowing is the part that's killing us. So whatever the paper says, you bring me the true thing. You promise me that and not the other promise." And there I sat with one foot in the stirrup and one on the ground, caught exactly between the two of them. The careful promise I'd made and the true one she was asking for. And I understood she'd seen straight through me 4 days ago after all. She'd heard where they went and she'd known it for the careful thing it was, and she'd let me have it because she'd needed the rest. And now she was rested and she was calling it. "I promise," I said, "the true thing however it comes." I meant it when I said it. I want that on the record. Whatever I did after, I meant it in that moment with the cold coming off the mountain and her gray eyes holding me to it. I didn't know yet that the true thing was going to be the kind a man could carry 3 ways at once, all of them true, and have to choose which true thing to bring home. Coldwater hadn't grown any in the year and a half since I'd last seen it. 40 miles of hard country had a way of keeping a town honest about its size. It sat in a dry fold of the hills around a single crossroad, a land office, a church, a mercantile, a saloon doing better than all 3 combined, and a scatter of houses holding on like burrs. I came in near dusk on the second day with my back screaming and the horse blown, and I took a room over the saloon because there was nowhere else to take one. And I lay awake most of the night listening to the piano downstairs murder a song I used to know, rehearsing what I'd ask and dreading the shape of the answers. The land office opened late, and the clerk opened later. He was a soft pink man named Fessenden with ink on 3 fingers, and the careful, bloodless manner of someone who'd spent his life turning human catastrophes into orderly entries in a book. I'd known the type. The country runs on them. They are the ones who write deceased in a tidy hand next to a name, and never once hear the sound the word makes when it lands on the people who loved it. I told him I was looking for a claim, a family named Hale, Thomas and Sarah with children, come through maybe 2.5 years back, looking to file on land. He didn't even reach for a book. That's the first thing that turned me cold. A clerk who knows a name without looking it up knows it because it gave him trouble once. "Hale," he said, his soft face did something complicated. "You kin?" "No, I've got their children." There, he stopped, set down his pen. For a moment the bloodless manner cracked and I saw there was a man under it after all, and the man was unhappy. "You've got the children, all 3, living." "All 3 living? Why do you ask it like that?" Fessenden got up and went to a cabinet and was a while at it, and came back with a thin folder, and laid it on the counter between us, and put his soft hand flat on it like he could keep what was inside from getting out. "I'll tell you what's in the record," he said. "But I'll tell you something first that isn't in the record, because you've ridden a long way and you've got those children, and you deserve to hear it from a person and not off a page. Are you ready to hear it?" "Tell me." "The Hales never got their land," he said. "They came through here in the autumn 2 years back come this fall. Filed their intent right at this counter. I took it myself. I remember the woman, gray eyes. She did the talking while the husband minded the little ones outside. Sharp woman, asked good questions. They had a parcel picked out up in the Sweetwater Bottoms, good ground, and they paid their fee and they went off to work it through the winter and come back in spring to prove up." He stopped. That winter was the bad one. You'll remember it. I remembered it. The winter the snow came in October and didn't quit till April. The winter I'd lost 40 head and counted myself lucky against neighbors who lost everything. The winter that, 2 years back now, had sat down on this country like something with a grudge. They were caught out in it, I said. It wasn't a guess. They were caught out in it. Fessenden's hand stayed flat on the folder. The Sweetwater Bottoms are 40 miles from anything in good weather. In that winter they were 40 miles from anything across country that kill a healthy man in an afternoon. We didn't know there was anybody up there. Nobody knew. A family doesn't tell the land office where they're wintering. Why would they? We found out in the spring. He took a breath. When the snow went off, a survey party came through the bottoms and found the cabin. And I'll tell you plain because you asked for it plain. They found the man, Thomas. The clerk's soft throat worked. He'd gone out into it, the way men do at the end when there's nothing left to burn and the little ones are crying with the cold. He'd gone out to try for help or for wood or just to die away from where the children could watch it. 40 miles from anything in February. He didn't get far. They found him in the spring, a quarter-mile from the cabin, pointed the right direction. That's the man whose notice I posted. Thomas Hale, deceased, fever, though it wasn't fever, that's just what we write. It's gentler in the post than the truth, and the truth was the cold and the hunger and the going out alone. I wrote fever. I've wondered since if I should have. The piano from the night before was going again in my head, the murdered song. I put my hand on the counter to have something under it. The children, I said. The notice didn't say anything about children. I read it. It said estate unclaimed. And here is where the morning turned. Here is where the simple grave I'd ridden 40 miles to confirm got up off the page and became something I had no map for. That's because there weren't any children at the cabin, Fessenden said. That's the thing, mister. That's the thing that's haunted this office 2 years. The survey party found the man dead in the open and the cabin empty. No woman, no children. 3 little bunks and a woman's boots by the cold stove and not one living or dead soul inside. Sarah Hale and 3 children gone, and no man here could tell you how. A woman alone with 3 bobbies, one of them an infant near as we could figure, in the dead of the worst winter in 20 years. She got them out of that cabin and she got them off that mountain, and not one of us could tell you how a body does that. We searched the spring through. We found the man. We never found a trace of the rest. We wrote estate unclaimed because there was nobody left we could prove was owed it. He looked at me. And now you walk in here and tell me you've got 3 Hale children living. 3, and I have got to ask you the question that this office has wanted answered for 2 years. He leaned across the counter. Where is their mother? I rode out of Coldwater that afternoon with the folder's contents copied in my own hand, and a hole blown clean through everything I'd come there sure of. I'd come to confirm a grave. I'd found 2 mysteries instead, fitted one inside the other like a puzzle box. The father was dead, that much was iron, that much I'd have to carry home and lay at Nell's feet, the true thing, no soft version. But the mother. The mother had walked 4 children off a death mountain in the worst winter in living memory, and then vanished off the face of the record entire. And 3 of those 4 children had walked into my yard 2 years later asking if I'd seen her, which meant somewhere between that frozen cabin and my fence line. Sarah Hale had become separated from her own children. 4 children, the clerk had said 4. 3 bunks but 4 children, he'd figured an infant on top, and 3 had come to me. I made myself ask it before I left. I made myself, even though I already half knew the way you know weather. The 4th child, I'd said. You said 4. The neighbors at Halloran's Crossing who knew them on the way through said 4, Fessenden had answered, careful. An infant, but mister, I'd not set much store by it. People misremember. And an infant in that winter. He hadn't finished. He hadn't had to. So I rode home with that too, with the arithmetic of it. 4 children left a cabin with their mother in the killing cold. 3 children arrived at my gate 2 years on without her. And somewhere in the gap between those 2 facts was the whole unwritten history of how a family comes apart on the road. What gets left behind in the snow? What gets buried where there's time to bury and abandoned where there's not? What a mother does at the crossroads of all of us die here and some of us might live if. I thought about Junie. Junie who was 4, maybe 5. Junie who'd have been 2, maybe 3 that winter. The infant the neighbors remembered would be older now, would be Junie's age near enough. Was Junie the infant who'd somehow lived? Then who was the 4th, the one the count came up short by? Or had the neighbors miscounted, and there'd only ever been 3, and the whole grim arithmetic was a clerk's careful guess laid over a frightened family glimpsed once on a road? I didn't know. I want to be honest that I rode 40 miles home not knowing, my head full of dead men in the snow and a vanished mother and a maybe infant, and underneath all of it, getting louder the closer I got to my own gate, the one question that mattered more than all the rest of it put together. What do I tell the girl? I'll tell you what I decided to tell her, and then I'll tell you what happened to that decision, because they're not the same and the gap between them is the heart of this whole business. I decided to tell her the father was dead. The true thing, like she'd asked. Gentle as I could make it, but true, that he'd been caught in the bad winter, that he'd died trying to save them, that there was a grave or near enough to one in Coldwater that I could take her to when she was ready. That much she'd asked for, and that much she'd carry. She'd told me herself she could carry the true thing, and I believed her. But the mother, the mystery of the mother, the vanished, the maybe alive, the 4 that should have been. That part I decided to hold. Because here's the reasoning I'd built on the long ride, and you can judge it however you judge it. I've judged it 1,000 ways myself. If I told Nell her mother had walked off that mountain alive and then vanished, I would be handing that girl a hope with no bottom to it. A hope she could fall into forever. Her father dead was a grief. And a grief, however terrible, is a thing with edges, a thing you can eventually set down. But a mother may be alive, somewhere, lost on a road 2 years cold. That wasn't a grief. That was a hook. That would put Nell right back on the road, baby sister and brother in tow, walking the territory town to town for another 2 years, another 10, chasing a woman who might be alive or might be 20 kinds of dead, and the not knowing of it stretching out in front of that child for the rest of her natural life. The not knowing is the part that's killing us, she'd said, and I'd be handing her an unkillable, unfindable, eternal not knowing and calling it the truth. So I decided. The father told true. The mother, I'd say I'd found no trace, which was true. The record held no trace of where she'd gone, and I'd let the search end there in my kitchen with a grief that had edges instead of a hope that had none. I'd let her set the world down. I'd lie by leaving out the largest lie of my life, and I'd do it on purpose with my eyes open, because I'd convinced myself it was the kinder grave. That was my plan, riding up to my own gate on the 3rd evening. It lasted exactly as long as it took me to get inside the door. The lamp was lit. Junie was up in color in her face, and a wooden horse in her hands that a sa had whittled her. A sa could whittle, it turned out, a thing his father had taught him, and he'd spent the 3 days I was gone making his baby sister a horse to replace the mule they'd buried. The boy had a gift in his hands and grief in them too, and he'd put both into that little horse. And Nell was at the table, waiting. She'd heard the horse come in and she hadn't run out to meet me. She'd sat herself at the table with her hands folded and her back straight, and she'd made herself wait, because she'd decided this was a thing to receive sitting down and steady. And the sight of her sitting there, having arranged herself to be brave, very nearly took my legs out from under me. "You found the paper," she said. "I found the paper." "Sit down then," she said, and turned my own kindness back on me, gestured at the chair across from her the way I gestured at the chair 3 days back. "And tell me the true thing. I sent the little ones a sa, take Junie in the back and show her how the legs move." And a sa, who was older than 9 in all the ways that count, gathered his sister and the wooden horse and took them out of the room without a word, because he'd understood from his sister's face that this was grown business and grief was coming. And at the door he looked back at me once, and there was a man's question in a boy's eyes, "Is it bad?" and I couldn't answer it, and he saw that I couldn't, and he took the baby out. Then it was the two of us and the lamp. Your father, I said. I had rehearsed gentle, and gentle deserted me. There is no gentle for this, there's only slow. Nell, your father's gone. He died in the bad winter 2 years back, the one with the October snow. They were caught out in it up in the Sweetwater bottoms on the land they'd filed on. He died trying to get help for the rest of you. He went out into the snow to try for it, and it took him. They found him in the spring. There's a record of it and a place, and I can take you there when you're ready. That's the true thing about your father. He died trying to save you. I watched it land. She didn't make a sound. That was the worst of it. She'd spent her tears on smaller things, like I'd guessed. She had nothing left for the largest thing, and so it came out of her in silence. Her face didn't crumple, it aged. It did the thing I'd seen the first morning, except all the way this time. The last of the child going out of it like a lamp turned down. Her hand stayed folded. A long shudder went through her and was mastered. She'd been the strong one so long that even this, even her own father's death, she received the way a soldier receives a casualty, understood, logged, carried. Doc Prute's words came back to me. It doesn't bend them. It turns them old early, and then it breaks them all at once when they finally set it down. He went out into the snow, she repeated, very quiet, for us. For you. I remember the snow, she said, and her voice had gone somewhere far off. I remember it came and came. I remember Papa going out the door and Mama holding it shut after him with her whole body, holding it shut and not letting us look out the window, and I never knew why she wouldn't let us look out the window. Her gray eyes came up to mine, and they were terrible. They were 2 years of a locked window finally opening. She wouldn't let us watch him go. That's why. So we wouldn't see him not come back. And then she said the thing that killed my whole careful plan dead where it sat. And Mama, she said, the paper, does it say where Mama went? Here it was, the fork in the road I'd ridden 80 miles to reach. I had it loaded and ready, no trace. The record holds no trace. Your search ends here in this warm kitchen with a grief that has edges. It was right there in my mouth, the merciful lie, the kinder grave. And I looked at her face, at the locked window finally open. At the girl who had just told me, unprompted, the thing she'd carried alone for 2 years and never understood. She wouldn't let us watch him go. And I understood with a force that took the lie right out of my mouth that this child had spent 2 years being given the soft thing by everyone who'd ever pitied her. And that every soft thing had been another locked window. Another don't look. Another grown person deciding she couldn't bear the truth and handing her a comfortable nothing instead. And I'd been about to do it too. I'd ridden 80 miles to do it gently. You bring me the true thing, she'd said at the gate. You promise me that and not the other promise. I'd promised. And the merciful lie sitting in my mouth was the other promise wearing a kind face. And if I told it, I would be exactly the lady at Halloran's Crossing and the preacher at Dell, and every other soul who'd looked at this iron-spined child and decided she was too breakable for her own life. She wasn't breakable. She'd buried a mule and buried things and held a door's worth of grief shut with her own body for 2 years. The one thing that might break her wasn't the truth. It was one more person she'd trusted deciding to lie to her for her own good. I made the second hard decision of this whole story right there with the lamp between us, and it was the opposite of the one I'd ridden home intending to make, and I have never once been sure I chose right. I only know I chose true. The paper doesn't say where your mother went, I said. That's true, but it says something else, and you asked me for the true thing, so I'm going to give you all of it and trust you to carry it because you've earned that, and I'll not insult you with less. I leaned in. Nell, they found your father in the spring. They found the cabin, and the cabin was empty. No bodies in it. 3 bunks, your mother's boots by the stove, and not a soul. Your mother got you children out of there, off that mountain. In the worst winter this country's ever seen, alone. Your father already gone, she walked you out. And nobody in Coldwater could tell you how a living woman does that, but she did it, because here you are. Your mother didn't die in that cabin. The last anybody knows, your mother was alive and saving you and walking. The window open, and now light coming through it. "She's alive," Nell whispered. "I don't know that," I said fast, because this was the cliff and I had to hold her back from the edge of it even as I handed her the thing. "Listen to me. I don't know that. The record stops at the empty cabin. 2 years is a long time in a hard country, and I will not tell you she's alive because I don't know it and you asked me not to give you the soft thing. What I know, the true thing, all of it, is that she walked off that mountain alive with you children, and that somewhere on the road after you got separated from her and that nobody knows where she is now. Alive or not. That's the truth. It's not a soft truth and it's not a hard truth. It's an open one, and I'm sorry because I know an open one's the hardest kind to hold." But she wasn't listening to the careful part. I watched her not listen to it. I watched 2 years of any day now. The thing she told the baby on every hill to keep her walking. The lie that turned out not to be a lie. I watched it light up behind her gray eyes like dawn coming up over a ridge, and I knew I'd done a thing I could not take back. "She got separated from us," Nell said slowly, "on the road. I remember," and she stopped. And something moved across her face that I didn't understand then and would understand far too well before this was over. A flinch. A door this time closing. "I remember the road," she said, "and it came out wrong, came out careful. And for the first time since the gate it was Nell giving me the soft thing, Nell holding a window shut with her own body so I wouldn't see out it. I should have caught it. I've gone back to this moment more than any other. The flinch, the careful voice, the daughter who'd just been handed her mother's survival and met it not with pure joy but with a half-second of pure animal fear. But I was too full of what I'd done, too busy bracing for the hope I just lit, too sure I understood the shape of this, to read the one thing on her face that didn't fit. I thought the fear was fear of hopping, fear of the open truth, the not knowing, the road stretching out again. It wasn't that. It was that Nell remembered exactly how she'd gotten separated from her mother on the road. She'd remembered it for 2 years. It was the real thing she'd been carrying. Not the search. The search was the thing she let everyone see. And she had just realized that the man who'd promised her the true thing was about to go looking for her mother in earnest. And that if he looked hard enough he would find the true thing too, the whole true thing, the part that wasn't on any paper in Coldwater. The part only Nell knew. The part about what really happened on the road. "We'll look for her," I heard myself say, because I was a fool, because I'd already lit the fire and didn't yet know I'd lit it over a powder keg. "Together. Not you alone, not anymore. You're done walking the territory alone with these bobbies. You'll stay here, all of you. This is your fire now, and I'll do the looking and we'll pull every thread there is. Land offices, churches, the army, the freight lines. Somebody saw a gray-eyed woman with children on that road 2 years back. People remember a thing like that. We'll find where she went. And this time I mean it the way you meant it. We'll find her, or we'll find what happened to her, but we'll have the true thing at the end of it and you'll never have to wonder again. I promise you. No more not knowing." And Nell looked at me, the girl who'd asked for truth and gotten more of it than she'd bargained for. And her face was doing two things at once, and I only read the one I expected. "You promise," she said. "I promise." "No more not knowing," she repeated, and her voice was strange, was thin, was the voice of someone agreeing to walk back toward the one thing in the world they've been running from. "Okay, okay, Caleb." She unfolded her hands at last. They were shaking just slightly, and I thought it was hope. "We'll find out what happened to her." She got up from the table. At the door to the back room, where Asa and Junie were waiting with the little wooden horse, she stopped with her hand on the frame. She didn't turn around. "Caleb," she said, "when you go looking, if somebody tells you a thing about us, about that winter, about the road, a thing that doesn't match what I've told you." A long pause. The lamp ticked. "Will you ask me first, before you believe it? Will you come and ask me first?" "Course I will," I said, easy, not understanding. The way you agree to anything a child asks when you're full of having done a hard, true thing well. "Promise me that one too," she said. "That's the one I need most, more than the other. Promise you'll ask me first." "I promise," I said, and she went in to her brother and sister, and I sat at the table with the lamp, warm with the feeling of a man who'd chosen truth over comfort and done right by a child. And I had no idea, none, not the smallest splinter of it, that the girl had just asked me to make her the one promise I was going to have to break. Because the true thing about Sarah Hale was waiting for me out there on the road. And when I found it, it was not going to be a thing I could carry home and ask Nell about gently over a lamp. I waited 11 days before I went out looking, and I'll tell you why, because the why matters. It wasn't caution, though I called it that to myself. It was that I'd watched Nell come apart slow over those 11 days in a way I didn't have a name for yet, and some animal part of me didn't want to leave the house with her like that. She'd gotten quieter, which you'd think would be the grief settling, except it wasn't the quiet of settling. It was the quiet of a person holding very still so a thing inside them won't move. She did all her chores. She minded Junie and she praised Asaz whittling, and she ate what I put in front of her. And every evening she sat at the table after the little ones were down and asked me, in the same flat, careful voice, the same question. "When you go," she'd say, "you'll ask me first if anybody tells you a thing." "I'll ask you first," I'd say. And she'd nod and go to bed, and I'd sit up wondering what in God's name a 12-year-old could be so afraid. I'd be told that she needed my promise to ask her about it 3 separate evenings running. I told myself she was afraid of false rumors, of some stranger's careless word that her mother was dead, dropped on her second hand, the soft thing or the cruel thing instead of the true one. That's what I told myself. It let me keep not seeing the thing that was right in front of me, which is a trick the mind will do for you right up until it can't anymore. On the 11th day, a freighter named Dahlin came through on the Coldwater Road, hauling for the high camps, and I rode out to meet him at the bottom of my own lane because freighters are the memory of this country. They go everywhere slow, the same routes year on year, and they watch, because watching the road is the whole of their job. If a gray-eyed woman and her children had moved across this territory 2 years back, a freighter was likelier to have the thread of it than any land office. I described them. The woman, the children, the bad winter, the Sweetwater bottoms, the empty cabin, the walking out. I gave him all of it the way you cast wide when you're not sure where the fish are. Dahlin chewed on it a long while. He was an old hand, near my age, with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had spent 40 years on horizons. And I watched something catch behind those eyes, watched him land on a memory the way a man's hand lands on a thing he set down years ago and forgot he owned. 2 years back, he said slow, spring after the bad winter, the Dell Road north of the crossing. He looked at me. "You sure you want this one, friend? Because I've carried it a while and it's not a sweet one." The 11 days of Nell's flat, careful voice came back to me all at once, and the bottom went out of my stomach, and I said, "Tell me." "There was a man named Sutter had a soddy off the Dell Road," Dahlin said. "Dead now himself 2 winters back, but alive then. And the spring after the bad winter, Sutter buried a woman and a baby on his own ground, off the road, and put up a marker. And the next time I came through, he flagged me down to tell me about it because it had got into him and he needed to set it on somebody." Dahlin's jaw worked. "He said a woman came down the Dell Road in the worst of that spring, half dead, carrying an infant that was already gone, had been gone some while, he reckoned, but she was still carrying it, the way they do when their minds broke from it. And she had," he stopped. He looked at me very steady. "She had other children with her, older ones, and she'd sent them on ahead. That's the part Sutter couldn't get past. She made the older ones go on to the town without her, and she stayed back at his soddy, and she died there inside of 2 days, and Sutter buried her and the baby together. He said her last clear words were about the older children. He said she made him promise that if anyone ever came asking, he was to tell them she'd sent the children on herself, that it was her doing, that they were to know it was her doing and not theirs." I sat my horse in the middle of my own lane and could not speak. "She made the older ones go on without her. It was her doing and not theirs." And every piece of it turned over in my mind at once and fit, and I understood, 11 days too late, what Nell had been holding still around. Why she'd flinched at the table. Why separated had come out of her wrong and careful. Why she'd needed my promise to ask her first, 3 evenings running, in a flat, dead voice. Nell hadn't gotten separated from her mother on the road. Nell had been sent. A 10-year-old girl had stood on a road 2 years ago, and her mother had told her to take the little ones and go on to the town. And Nell had looked back, and her mother had waved her on. And Nell had obeyed, had turned and walked her brother and baby sister away from her dying mother because her dying mother told her to, and she had been carrying that for 2 years. Not the search. The search was the thing she let everyone see, the brave thing, the any day now. The real thing, the thing she'd held a window shut over with her whole body, was that she had left her mother on a road to die, and she could not forgive herself for the obeying. And she had built a 2-year pilgrimage out of the wreckage of it, where looking for Mama, because looking for her was the only way left to not have left her. The whole search was penance. The whole search was a child trying to walk her way back to the road she'd been sent away from. And I, 11 days ago, full of myself for choosing truth over comfort, had handed her back the road. We'll find her, I'd said. We'll find out what happened to her. No more not knowing. And she'd asked me, promise you'll ask me first. Because she'd known the second I went looking I'd find Sutter's grave and Sutter's story. And she could not bear for me to learn the truth of what she'd done from a stranger's second-hand mouth before she could explain it, defend it, make me understand she hadn't wanted to leave, that her mother had made her. Friend, Dolan said, and I realized I'd been a long time silent. You all right? Where, I said, my voice came out wrong. The marker, Sutter's ground, where is it? He told me. Off the Dell Road north of the crossing, a half-day's ride. And he told me the thing Sutter had carved on the marker because Sutter had told him and it had stuck, not a name, because Sutter never learned her name, she'd been past telling it. Just 3 words and a fact. A mother, who sent her children on to live. I thanked Dolan. I don't remember doing it. I remember turning the horse and I remember the lane and I remember the house at the top of it with smoke coming up too big from the chimney. Because I'd taught a starving girl it was all right to make more fire than one body needs, and I remember thinking, the whole way up that lane, about the promise. Promise you'll ask me first. I'd promised, and I just learned the whole of it from Dolan without asking her a thing, learned it second-hand off a dead man's grave marker by way of a freighter, exactly the way she'd begged me not to. I hadn't broken the promise on purpose, but intent doesn't unbreak a thing. I'd given her the one promise she said she needed most, and the road had broken it for me before I ever got home. Now I had to walk into that house carrying the true thing she'd been running from for 2 years, and somehow not let it land on her the way it had landed on me, like a verdict. She knew the moment I came in the door. Of course she knew. She'd been reading Men Coming Up Road since before she should have had to. She'd read me on the worst morning of her life, and she read me now. She was at the stove with Junie on her hip, and she looked at my face, and her own went very white and very still, and she set Junie down careful and said, Asa, take Junie out to see the horse. Stay out till I call you. And Asa, who missed nothing, took the baby's hand and went. And at the door he looked back at me with that man's question in a boy's eyes again. And this time I gave him the smallest nod I could. Yes, it's the bad thing. And he swallowed and took his sister out into the yard. Then it was the 2 of us and the stove, like before. Except this time she didn't sit down, and she didn't tell me to. This time she stood with her back to the warm iron and her hands down at her sides and her chin up, and she looked like nothing so much as a person standing in front of a firing squad who has decided they will not be made to kneel. You found Sutter, she said. I found a freighter who knew Sutter, Sutter's past, but yes, I found the thread. I made myself hold her eyes. Nell, I didn't ask you first, I know I promised. I want you to know it wasn't, I didn't go behind you. The freighter just had it. He'd carried it years and he set it down on me before I knew what it was, and by the time I knew the whole. Tell me what he said. Flat, iron, all of it, don't soften it. You don't get to soften it now. So I told her. All of it like she asked, the way she taught me to give it. The woman on the Dell Road, the baby already gone, the soddy, the 2 days, the burying. And I watched her receive it standing up, not a muscle moving, and I thought, she already knows all this, I'm not telling her anything. She watched most of it happen. And then I got to the part she didn't know, the part that wasn't hers, the part that belonged to a dying woman and a stranger named Sutter, and I slowed down, because this was the only thing I'd carried home that she didn't already own. She made Sutter promise something, I said, before she died. She made him promise that if anyone ever came asking, if her children ever came looking, or anyone came looking for them, he was to tell them it was her doing, that she sent you on herself, that you were to know it was her doing and not yours. My voice was going. I let it. Nell, your mother spent some of the last words she had left in the world making sure that someday somebody would tell you you didn't leave her, that she sent you. She knew. She knew you'd carry it like you left her, and she spent her dying breath trying to reach forward 2 years and take it off you. And it took 2 years and a freighter and a foolish old man, but it got here. The message got here. She got it to you. And the marker. I told her the marker, a mother, who sent her children on to live. No name, because Sutter never got her name, she was past it, but he'd carved the Y of her, the only thing she'd had breath left to give him, which was you, which was the 3 of you sent on to live. That was when Nell broke. I've been bracing for it 11 days without knowing that's what I was bracing for. Prout's warning. Watch for the setting down, that's the dangerous part. And here it came. Not a crumple, not a child's cry. It came up out of her like something tearing loose from the bottom of a deep well, a sound I'd only heard once before in my life, and that one had come out of me 8 years back, alone in this same room. The sound a person makes when they finally set down a weight they'd convinced themselves they'd die before setting down. And the setting down hurts worse than the carrying ever did, because now there's nothing left to do but feel it. She told me any day. Nell got out between the tearing. On the road. She said, go on, I'll catch you up any day now. You'll turn around and I'll be on the road behind you any day. And I believed her. I was 10 and I believed her, and I went. I took the little ones and I went, and I looked back once. The well-bottom sound again. I looked back once and she waved me on, and I turned around, and that was the last. I gave her one look back and then I just walked. What kind of who does that? Who leaves there? A child does that, I said. I was down on my knees in front of her now. I don't remember getting there. A 10-year-old child does that because her mother told her to, and because her mother was right. Nell, look at me, look at me. If you'd stayed, you'd all 4 be under Sutter's marker. You and Asa and Junie, all of you, dead on that road 2 years back, and nobody left to even carry the name. Your mother knew that. That's why she sent you. She did the hardest arithmetic a person can do, and she chose to lose herself so she wouldn't lose all of you. And the only way that choice meant anything, the only way her dying counted for one single thing, was if you went, if you obeyed. You think leaving her was the thing you did wrong. My voice cracked clean through. Leaving her was the last thing she ever asked you for. You gave her the only thing she wanted at the end of her life. You took her bobbies and you kept them alive. 2 years, Nell. 2 years you kept them fed and walking and believing on nothing, on a drawing and a lie called any day now. And you know where you learned that lie? You learned it from her. She gave you any day now to keep you walking off that road, and you turned around and gave it to Junie to keep her walking, and it worked. And that's not you leaving your mother, child, that's you carrying her. You've been carrying your mother in your own mouth for 2 years. Every time you told that baby any day now, that was your mother, still walking you to safety. She went down, just folded, the iron all gone out of her at last, and I caught her, and she cried into my shoulder the way she should have been able to cry 2 years ago, and hadn't had anyone safe enough to cry on. And I held a stranger's child on the floor of my kitchen, and I cried too, for her, and for her mother on the Dell Road, and for Sutter who carved Y instead of a name, and for my own boy and my own Margaret, and for every soul who ever had to do impossible arithmetic in the snow. The stove ticked. Outside, I could hear Asa, low, telling Junie some long made-up thing about the horse to keep her out in the yard, keep her from the window, Asa holding the window shut now. The way his mother had, the way his sister had, the long line of them shutting windows so the littlest wouldn't have to see. I let her cry till she was done. It took a while. 2 years takes a while. We buried nothing and we marked nothing new, because Sutter had already done both, better than I could. But that fall, when Junie was strong and the passes were still open, I took them. All three. Down the Dell Road north of the crossing, to a soddy fallen mostly back into the ground and a marker a dead man had carved for a woman whose name he never learned. I'd worried over taking Junie. She was 5 by then and she didn't remember the road, didn't remember her mother, but as a warmth and a smell and a voice that said any day now, and I'd thought, maybe she's too small for a grave. Nell set me straight on that. She walked it the first time, Nell said. She gets to know where it ends. 12 going on 100, that one. So they stood at the marker, the three of them, and I stood back and let them have it. Asa took off his hat the way his father must have taught him once, before the snow. Junie put the little wooden horse down at the foot of the marker, left it there, her one treasure, set it down in the dirt for a mother she couldn't remember, and Nell didn't stop her, just put a hand on the baby's dark hair, and I had to turn and look at the horizon for a while. And Nell read the marker out loud to Junie, who couldn't read yet, a mother who sent her children on to live. And then Nell added the part that wasn't carved, the part I'd brought home, the part she decided the baby was owed. That means us, she said. She sent us on so we could live. That's what she wanted. That's the whole thing she wanted. And Junie, 5 years old, looked up at the marker and at her sister and said, so we have to live then. Not a question. A small girl working out her job in the world. So we have to live, to make it count. That's right, Nell said. Her voice held. It had been holding better since the kitchen floor. So we have to live to make it count. That's the closest thing to hope again I can give you, honest. And it isn't the shape anybody wants when they start a thing like this. Nobody walks 2 years across a territory hopping to find a grave with no name on it. Nell had walked toward a living mother right up until the kitchen, and the kitchen took the living mother away from her for good and gave her back a dead one with a marker and a message instead. But here is the thing I've come to understand about hope in the years since, sitting at this same table with this same too big fire. Hope isn't the thing you wanted coming true. Most times it doesn't out here. Hope is finding out the weight you've been carrying was never yours to carry, and being allowed at last to set it down. Hope is a stranger named Sutter spending the last good he had in him to carve, why instead of leaving a woman nameless and unburied. Hope is a freighter carrying a dead man's message 3 years up and down a road until it finds the ears it was meant for. Hope is a child who left her mother learning she didn't leave her mother, learning she obeyed her, which is a different thing, the opposite thing, the loving thing. They didn't find their parents. I want to be honest to the last, the way that gray-eyed girl taught me to be honest, standing at my fence in a dead man's coat refusing my charity. The children searched for their parents for 2 years, and they did not find them. Their father is a 1/4 mile from a cabin in the Sweetwater Bottoms, pointed the right direction. Their mother is under Sutter's marker on the Dell Road. That's the true thing, and there's no soft version, and I won't insult you with one. But they were looking for their parents because they had no home and no fire and no one, and they were trying to walk their way back to belonging to somebody. That's what the search really was, underneath the penance, underneath the any day now. 3 children walking the territory looking for the place where they belonged to somebody again. And that they found. They found it at a fence, on a foggy morning, at the gate of a worn-out old man who'd been keeping a fire too big for one body for 8 years without knowing why, keeping a door open in case anybody ever came back through it. Margaret kept that fire for me when I was as low as a man gets. I kept it after she was gone because I didn't know how to stop. And it turned out I wasn't keeping it for nothing. It turned out I was keeping it for them. 8 years of too much broth. And it had a reason the whole time. And the reason walked up my lane out of the fog one morning and asked me if I was the one who owned this land. I am, and now they do too, near enough as makes no difference. The papers I'll sort when Nell's old enough to sign them. The fire I've already sorted. It's theirs. It's 3 years on now that I'm telling you this. I'm an old man and I write it down of an evening because Asa keeps a log. He started it to track the whittling and the weather, and it grew the way those things grow. And he says I should write my part down too before I forget it. And the boys usually write, so here it is. Junie's 8 and she's forgotten the road and tire, which is the mercy I prayed for. She remembers the wooden horse, and she remembers the marker the way you remember a story somebody told you, soft at the edges, and that's right. That's how a thing that size ought to sit on an 8-year-old. She doesn't carry it. None of them carry it now the way Nell carried it. That's the whole victory, if there is one, that the weight got down to a size a child can hold, and then down again to a size a child can set on a shelf and only take down when she wants to. Asa's a young man and a good one, and he can do anything with his hands, and he's going to be all right in a world that's hard on gentle men, because he learned early how to be gentle and strong in the same body, which most men never learn at all. And Nell's 15 now and she still cuts her own hair, though she lets it grow longer and there's a mirror for it these days. She runs half this spread better than I ever did, and she fights me about the other half. She still asks for the true thing and won't take the soft one, and she still flinches sometimes at a window I've caught her of an evening, holding very still the way she used to. And I know she's somewhere on the Dell Road, looking back the one time her mother waved her on. I don't think that ever fully leaves a person. I don't think it should. It's the price of having loved somebody that much that young. But she sets it back down quicker now. That's the thing. She picks it up and she sets it back down, and she comes back to the table where there's a fire too big for the room and broth enough for 4, and she's home, and she knows she's home, and she doesn't have to walk anymore. Last week she was at the stove and I came in cold off the north slope, and there was Junie doing letters and Asa at his log and Nell with the ladle, and she looked back at me over her shoulder and said, easy, not even thinking about it, "You're late. It's near gone cold. Sit down, I'll warm it up." Sit down, I'll warm it up. I sat down. I didn't trust my voice. 3 years, and that's still the kindest thing anybody said to me in this house since Margaret, a worn-out old man, told to sit down and let somebody warm something up for him. The fire I kept for nobody, kept too big, kept 8 years out of grief I couldn't name, and now there's a girl at the stove of it telling me to sit down, and a baby doing her letters by its light, and a boy writing all of us down so we won't be forgot. The children searched for their parents for 2 years and never found them. But they found a fire that had been waiting for them 8 years without knowing it was waiting, and I found out at 56 what the fire had been for. And some evenings, when the wind comes off the north slope wrong and Ruby's old bones won't let her bark at it anymore, and the 4 of us are in here warm against it, I think a woman on the Dell Road got her wish after all, the only one she had breath left to make. She sent them on to live. They lived. They're living, right here at this table in this light where I'm warming my hands and watching them and writing it down.